Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm a settler in these lands, which means I feel a responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in the place I call home, and to take sincere actions towards decolonization, especially in my work as a public servant. If you're joining us from another part of the country or the world, there's a great resource that Amira will share in the chat so you can learn about the land where you live. Now, tonight is very exciting because through the magic of webinars, we get to hear a cross-country conversation. We're going to hear an author living in Hong Kong talking to another author living in Toronto about his new book. And that book, of course, is Batshit Seven, which I recommend everyone go and pick up from your local indie bookstore. We have partnered with a local bookstore here in Vancouver, Iron Dog Books, for this event. So go check them out and grab a copy, and Amira will share a link to that in the chat as well. So let's get into it. I'm excited to introduce today's speakers. If you two would both like to join me on stage. Perfect. So, Sheung-King's debut novel, You Are Eating an Orange, You Are Naked, was a finalist for the 2021 Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction and the 2021 Amazon Canada First Novel Award. It was longlisted for Canada Reads 2021 and named one of the best book debuts by the Globe and Mail. Sheung-King taught creative writing at the University of Guelph, where he received his MFA. He divides his time between Canada and China. And Thea Lim is the author of An Ocean of Minutes, which was a finalist for multiple national and international prizes, translated into 3 languages, and optioned for television. Her writing has been published in Granta, The Nation, The Paris Review, Best Canadian Stories, The Guardian, The Globe and Mail, Guernica, and others. She holds an MFA from the University of Houston. She has served as the Barker Fairley Distinguished Visitor at University College and as a Toronto Public Library writer-in-resident. Thrilled that you're both here with us tonight. And just a reminder to everybody that they're going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes or so, and then they will take your questions. So you can use that Q&A button at the bottom. We encourage you to be respectful and civil. Not that I think that will be a problem for any of you. And the same for the chat as well. So let's get this conversation started. Thea, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. I'm so delighted to be here. I jumped out of my seat when I got the invitation to moderate this. I'm known as a Sheung-King superfan, so I'm so happy to be here, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. And I thought we could start tonight with just a short reading from Batshit Seven. Will you do the honors?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight or this morning. I'm joining from Guangzhou right now, in the south of China, and I'm a huge Thea Lim friend as well. So I'm really happy to be doing this and having this opportunity to share some words tonight. I'm gonna read a little bit from the beginning of Batshit Seven. Batshit Seven is a novel about an international student who studied in Canada and returned to Hong Kong in 2019 during the Hong Kong protests. And in the beginning, he is constipated. Now Glue is standing in the living room, staring out at the window at the mountains. He returns to the toilet. Nope, still can't shit. Constipation sounds a little like simulation, which reminds Glue of the word assimilation. And the word assimilation makes him think about the sex he's been having with May for the past months. She's always been the one who initiates, who comes over to his place, knowing exactly what she wants. Glue enjoys how little control he has when she's on top of him, puts a blindfold on him, and ties his arm onto the bed. She often slaps him and even chokes him without warning. The lack of agency is the freedom Glue actively invites. Glue is hard. Constipation, arousal, confusion, and a looming sense of depression, and a vague sense of loss coming together naturally. Being bay is constipation. Being on its own means easy, informal, ordinary, and comfort. Bay, on the other hand, can mean secret. The words being bay describe this moment better than any English word Glue knows. He stands up and ejaculates into some toilet paper and approaches something like a state of post-nut clarity. There is no point waiting to hear back from the school in Shenzhen, Glue feels. He knows he won't get the job. Glue considers becoming an ESL instructor. Teaching ESL is as stable as a career as someone like you can have. Glue remembers a FaceTime conversation with his mother earlier this week. Glue's mom called this "ma se lok de hao." Direct translation: when the horse dies, walk on your feet. A more utilitarian way of saying "suck it up." I mean, you've never even had a full-time job. It's about time. So this is the moment where Glue kind of surrenders and then just lets the exterior societal structure and the post-colonial condition drive his life choices. And then from this point on, when Glue becomes an ESL instructor, he slowly becomes de-radicalized. He loses language. He starts self-orientalizing. He seeks ways to be overtly vulgar. And in a way, he seeks to be punished for the privilege that he has, having studied abroad and coming back and using that privilege. And because he tries so hard to de-radicalize himself, towards the end, he gets an email from the university he has studied to write a piece. For a professor had asked him to write a piece that's 150 words. And so he can't do it, and he deletes the email. But the narrator, which is a third-person narrator, jumps in and kind of writes it for Glue. And the piece is called Language Learners. Language Learners. Every motion is a gesture. You say this about rain in films by Ozu. A gesture's meaning comes from the response it elicits. When you respond to a gesture, the meaning of your response is sent simultaneously to the preceding gesture and the gestures that come after. Everything we do is in dialogue with something else. But AI systems struggle to understand this outside a game of Go, where not all the rules are set. So I resort to asking my students to close their eyes. Listen to the sounds around you, I say. Think of all noise and gestures and respond to them with gestures of your own. But they don't move. One breath after another, the classroom's breathing becomes heavier and heavier. Each breath now responds to one that came before, gives meaning to the one that comes after. An organism is formed. 150 words. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everybody's clapping in their muted areas. I really appreciate the fact that, like, after the first paragraph, he just decides to give in to colonizations. The way you set the scene there. And I want to, listening to you speak, that I'm now very curious about the relationship between the vulgar and the radical. But I think I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later. I'll start with sort of just a question about what this book is really doing, I guess. So many years ago, a writing instructor told me that I only write about insiders who are outsiders, or outsiders who are insiders. And I found that very haunting. But I think that's also why I gravitate towards your work. Your characters are inside outsiders or outside insiders. And what I mean by that is, when I think about the protagonist of your last novel, You Were Eating an Orange, You Were Naked, that unnamed protagonist is someone with a lot of privilege. He has a lot of class privilege, educational privilege, passport privilege, but he's really driven by this underlying uneasiness. And that's what sort of has him compulsively pursuing his girlfriend, which is, in a way, the narrative spine of the story, as if she can cure what ails him. And then our main character, Glue, in Batshit Seven, is kind of, in a really fascinating way, kind of the same character, but a different, in a version, I think, of him in a different universe, a more bitter universe. His privileges as this Western educated Hong Konger make him very ill at ease with the friends he left behind, but his legal status makes him unable to stay in Canada. So what is it about these outsiders who are insiders that interests you? And I guess this is a long-winded way of asking, where do you get your ideas from?
Yeah, thank you for such a thoughtful question and observation. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about also uh, the idea of like how empire is always a part of like diaspora. And I think this is very evident in the Viet Thanh Nguyen's work and in The Committed, where he talks about how um the the idea of assimilating and like having a certain status also means to assimilate and adapt to a larger imperial empire's kind of status. And that part of yourself, it's hard to realize that that's the condition you're putting yourself in, because all you can see in those moments is the repression that you're coming from. But you're actually entering something else, and that's something else, this empire, is very approximate to kind of whiteness. And Glue's situation of having been educated in Canada for 7 to 8 years, and coming back at this time, he kind of feels guilty. He feels like, okay, I don't really, I've been away all this time when all of these things started happening. I'm not a part of this narrative um, that um, that 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 is ongoing right now. And so he feels a kind of discomfort. Um, but his close friend, his childhood close friend, Po Ing, who also happens to be his drug dealer, is very critical of that part of him. And he brings up the parts that like make Glue very uncomfortable. And Glue kind of sees himself accepting that. Like he even submits himself to the kind of violence that Po Ing kind of inflicts on him. Boeing beats him up, takes his money, shames him. Um, but in a way, he does this, and Poing is able to do this because he also understands Glue in a way that, like, okay, you left for all this time. You feel guilty about this. This is what you get, and you know that this is something that you need to accept as well. Is that you are now here, you have a job, you have a place to live because you had left, you were educated abroad, and then all of these like rhetorics that you kind of embrace that uphold the Western democratic framework that you bring now back is not applicable to here at all. It's just a reason for you to like justify your existence here. It's not local anymore. And international students who all of which I grew up with, a lot of them going to a boarding school in Ontario. Like we go back like once or twice a year. We don't really belong to the place. We spend most of our times like away as an international student. But then a lot of times you have to go back, and during COVID is when that happened. A lot of people like after that or during that had to return because it made no sense for them to stay. School was happening online. And when you're from Hong Kong, that's also the time when a lot of change is happening. So that becomes the situation that Blue was thrown into.
The Glue himself is not currently a student, right? He's sort of a little bit further along. Was there a reason why, perhaps when you were thinking about those international students who were sort of stranded in this digital space during COVID, was there a reason why you didn't write about someone who was currently enrolled, like basically living as a student in Canada while not living in a student in Canada as well?
Yeah, yeah, I think so because Glue, his undergrad is in theater studies. He tries not to think about that, and he's an MFA dropout. So in Hong Kong, that's basically a financial hub designed to be a financial hub to
Mhm.
connect China to other markets. It's difficult unless you like engage in like international education, which is hard during that time
Mhm.
um, to find a job. It's quite hard for him to find a place in the
Mhm.
arts.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I wanted the character to be struggling through this, realizing that like I get to study all of this because I had left, because I wasn't here. If I had done all of this here, my trajectory would have been very different. And
Mhm.
now that he can't anymore, he needs to force himself to find a way to recondition himself in the society that he grew up in.
Yeah, yeah. It's like if he had been a currently enrolled student, he would have a buffer, I think, between him and the conditions under which he was living. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when he accepts all those beatings from Po Wing, is that a radical act? Like, does that absolve him? of his colonial privileges as a diasporic person, of the fact that he has affected empire? Like, is that how it works, or is there no way to sort of reconcile that privilege? Or do the readers have to read the book?
I think readers should read the book. But
Yes.
Glue does a couple of things to deal with that. He self-orientalizes in the sense that when he becomes an ESL student, he starts speaking Chinglish to everybody after work, like fluent English when he's teaching online, and afterwards when he goes to play basketball or like sees his family, he starts speaking like Konglish almost, like mixing Cantonese slang with his English and speaking with an accent, like intentionally like restructuring the grammar to be more aligned with Cantonese. And to strangers, they're kind of scared of him. They're like, don't engage with him. They just let him be. Like, this guy sounds way too confident to be like a ESL person. But at the same time, he's like so comfortable doing that like that also becomes like getting beaten up. It becomes a way for him to it's a radical way for him to try to begin to accept who he is. And I kind of like that idea when it makes other people uncomfortable, when he's self-orientalizing to a point that the power dynamic of the gaze is kind of reverted. Because like people would think that, okay, that's how a Chinese person talks, but when he like really amps it up, people will be like, okay, that's like way too self-subjecting towards a white gaze, and that's very, very uncomfortable.
Well, what is the meaning of the fact that his attempt to divest himself, or not even divest himself of his privilege, because I think as diasporic or transnational people, as diasporic Chinese, you have, it would be quite corrupt to not understand the impossibility of that in a way. But if we do kind of understand his self-orientalizing, his speaking Chinglish is like him trying to acknowledge that something isn't right, to at least be like, something is weird here. What is the meaning of the fact that it takes the form of just kind of the interpersonal, or even like the interior or existential, rather than him actually trying to move or change existing power relations? Yeah, what does that mean? Like, because he doesn't, he could join a radical group, but he doesn't.
Yeah, he could join a radical group. Yeah. It's quite implied that Poe has a lot of connections to like more radical things that he could really easily be engaged in. But Poe never asks. Maybe he
can see why.
Yeah, you can see why, like, this guy. He also feels like, because he kind of feels guilty with his family, like he feels like he's living in the apartment. His sister Gwen, who loves him, who might be the only person who cares about him throughout the book, almost unconditionally, is moving on with her life. She moved out, leaving Glue alone in his childhood home. And so Glue, all of these desires to be revolutionary, be radical, is kind of forced to be sublimated, because he has this like almost like neo-Confucius values that he kind of like he needs to uphold with his family. Like, his mom was so happy that he was like, oh yeah, you're finally getting you finally realize that you can be an ESL structure and live financially fine. And then he kind of feels like, all right, then maybe I need to do this for a bit. And it gets towards the end of the book, it gets to an extreme where like he loses his ESL job and he just straight up becomes an immigration consultant. Like, he's just like moving rich people to Canada because of his connections. And he's using his Chinglish to level that, because he'll be like, if I can speak like this, people who don't really have a North American accent will be more comfortable doing that as well. So he self-commodifies, self-orientalizes, says all of his desublimated desires in order to uphold the structure that Hong Kong is designed for, and also kind of Confucius values that he feels like he needs to
Um,
uphold.
I like that his attitude towards his family is like, well, the very least I can do for them is uphold the status quo. I mean, it's quite the bind. So I read this novel in part with the help of an app. And what the app did was it read the novel out loud for me while I was driving. And the best way to describe this app is that a listless robot voice reads out the text without really any concern for emotion or emphasis or some of the things that the author was trying to do. And the robot actually, for that reason, does a bad job of reading certain books. But I have to say that her affectless style was pretty perfect for Batshit Seven. When you were doing your reading, I was thinking about the fact that throughout the book, emotion is sort of described more than felt, like what kind of disorienting, I think, and for me, like a really admirably bold choice that is when, in some ways, like as artists, as authors, we're part of like the economy of emotion. So to kind of like sidestep emotion in that way is very interesting. So I was wondering if you could talk about like how did you create that kind of drollness or detachment? And do you even agree with my assessment of the book? Would you describe it that way too? Because I think of it as like a very intellectual, like super intellectual, mannerly mental breakdown. Like that's what this book is. But I wonder if that would be your description too, and how you think about what the function is with its tone.
Oh, definitely. I think that's very on point. I'm thinking about a couple things when hearing that question. The narrator is a third person narrator, and the narrator
Mhm.
is way more articulate than Glue. The
Mhm.
narrator can explain
Mhm.
where his affect is coming from. It's like he didn't do anything because of this, and later on, years later, this thing that he saw on social media reaffirms his ideas. So the narrator jumps ahead of time, but also in the past to contextualize a moment that Glue was
Mhm.
experiencing
Mhm.
in the present. So
Mhm.
that kind of detachment allows for more kind of, as you put it, a mannerly voice to like really articulate his going batshit
Mhm.
through and I think it also is very helpful to have that third person narrator because Glue is like a very like he's very annoying, he's very wallowing, he's very self-deprecating, and he like and he doesn't really know why he does the things that he does. He just kind of like
Mhm.
but then
Mhm.
narrator, the narrator's detachment and almost like ethnographic study of Glue, and is able to have this kind of detached voice and find the humor in what he's doing.
Mhm.
Well, because I think Glue is ridiculous, but he lacks the self-awareness to have a voice that is satirical, humorous.
Mhm.
So I really wanted that to be brought through a third person narrator. I'm also with the AI voice, I'm also thinking about the idea of the smooth in like pop art and like really commercial art. And this idea by Byung-Chun Han, he talks about like how beauty is lost because of the negative distance between like an artifact and the affect. So when you see like a Jeff Koons piece, you just go like wow, and there's nothing in between. And I think like
Mhm.
AI voices that are completely flat, in a way does the opposite of that. There's no wow at all. There's no like, oh, you read this so beautifully. Um, the idea of the gimmick is like kind of removed. It's like completely flattened out. And I think the book is experimental, it's choppy, the prose are short. There are like
Mhm.
97 chapters that there are QR codes. And and the QR codes and the hashtags in the text, I have a fear that it will become very gimmicky. It'll be like, all right, it'll be very smooth.
Yeah.
So by finding out the ironing out the prose and like using a detached kind of humor to it, it 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 it's flat, but it's not smooth, and that's kind
Mhm.
of maybe I think that works for the tone.
Yeah, yeah. Flat but not smooth. You should write copy for this app. I mean, the funny thing about the app, that's exactly what it is. The funny thing about the app too is that you can pay more money to have a more human voice. But of
Oh,
course, as a
yeah.
working artist, I did not pay more money for the more human voice. But I really, yeah, that's really interesting. I really do feel like it adds something. I feel like it levels the playing field, and exactly as you say, like it takes, and it sort of requires this like brutal honesty, I think, about the text. This is quite interesting. Um, but I'm going to think about that a lot, smoothness, because I think as a writer, you are, apart from glue, apart from the particular subject, there's a real eloquence and beauty and fluidness to your writing. And it's so interesting to me to think about how you might manipulate that. And the thing is that I'm also fascinated by the idea that narrator creates a detachment and a mannerliness, and that's almost a truer version of how glue, who is a mess, really feels, that something cleaner can be a truer version of a mess. It's I'm going to think about that for a long time. So I have an audience question, kind of, which is that I read this book with another writer, another Sheung-King super fan, an emerging writer. So shout out to Ninja, who I think is here. And they sent me some questions to ask you. And I actually wasn't going to ask this question, but then when we were talking about like the vulgar and the radical, what is the relationship? Like, why does sort of becoming de-radicalized mean that you become vulgar? And there is so much like going on with the body in this book in a way that I also thought, it was really, sort of really going for it in a way that I appreciated. So, but here is Minja's question. So I was talking to friends, Minja says, about writing that explores the horny. And I like that there's a definition for the horny, is defined as the desire that has come out of nowhere and has nowhere to go and is therefore frustrated. Batshit Seven embodies this. Is Glue's historicizing, because that's sort of the kind of intellectualizing that he does all the way through the book, and that we actually saw from the jump with that opening that you read. Is that a way to satisfy the horny instead of doing anything that impacts the people in his life? And it's sort of funny the way you described Glue just now. What did you say? He was very annoying, or
Yeah.
I forget. He doesn't do anything. Just quietly having his existential crisis in the corners. So I think that my own question, which is like, what is the relationship between vulgarity and sort of being like, I'm going to go along with the empire, and what is the role of the horny, that sort of desire that has nowhere to go in this book?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Minja. That's such a thoughtful and also like funny question to ask. The it comes from nowhere and goes nowhere. I never thought about that in the terms of horny, but I did think about it in, like we mentioned, the desublimated desires that's like not doing, that came from, that kind of like maybe comes from somewhere but can't go anywhere. And maybe the somewhere that it comes from is not very clear. And I think about that in relation to, sorry if there's a lot of vulgarity in this book, but Glue masturbates to national anthems a lot. Throughout
Something
the book.
terrible happens to the goddess of mercy too, not to give it away, but
Yes, that's true. Um, yeah, and the ocean.
yes.
And I think all of that has to do with him trying to direct his like desublimated desires towards a kind of the kind of nationalism that like he feels like he is now a product of and needs to submit to. So there are two different, he had submitted to the kind of larger Anglo North American empire as a student, and then therefore is coming back to like use that kind of privilege to be like teaching ESL, and later on furthering that privilege by earning a lot of money as an immigration consultant. And then on the other hand, he's coming back to a place which is living in between empires. Hong Kong is living on borrowed time. It quite literally expires, and that expiration date it's feeling more and more imminent. And when that is the case, his kind of frustration maybe it's something because he's so like he doesn't know how to articulate this, but he's repressing a lot of these feelings and can't doesn't feel like he should do anything about it because he feels like an ironic sense of responsibility
Mhm.
towards his family, that he kind of directs all of these things and tries to submit to empires, but that ultimately breaks himself.
Mhm.
He goes batshit and commits an act of violence.
Mhm.
But then that act of violence kind of comes too late. It amounts to nothing.
Mhm.
So he goes back to de-radicalizing himself again. And I think his bodily responses to all of these things is it's his body knows that what he's doing is bad for him more than he himself does.
Mhm.
Like right off the bat, ESL instructor constipated, and
Mhm.
then when you're trying to submit to Empire, when like his sex life becomes a complete failure
Mhm.
after that. So his so I want the body to be an affective body who like feels I take a lot from the idea of feelings in politics, where where in your bodily affect understands the situation more than he himself does.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and those feelings, those discomforts and dysfunctionalities of his body is actually hinting him at something, but then he is like refusing to respond to his
Mhm.
own body's response to
Mhm.
politics that he's in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't
And
know
I
if that helps you
no,
when
no, that totally does, and I think that that's what makes this novel, which is very unflinching, and I think really like delightfully, like very happily hopeless. I think at the same time it has this very like full feeling to it, and I think that comes from the fact that there's a spectrum between right the imperial and the radical, but you're throwing in sort of a third leg dimension to this, which is the bodily, right? Remembering that there's also the animal and what does it mean to actually be like a human animal in the midst of all this. And I think it really rounds it out in a very profound way. You might have already to some degree sort of answered this question, but for me, when I read this book, especially reading the synopsis and you know how the synopsis itself talks about those the Hong Kong student protests that happened in 2019 and 2020, a moment of such incredible intensity. I was very surprised, another sort of bold choice, that the book actually keeps the protests pretty much entirely off the page. And I was wondering if you could talk about what was the use of that choice.
yeah. Um, I think I think do I do something similar, or I discuss something similar in Orange,
Mhm.
where the political is often like a thing that's like an undercurrent, or like you kind of feel, and it's
Mhm.
conveyed through emotions, or like like a like a condition that's that's kind of always there as you're a Hong Konger. And it wouldn't make, I think, for the story that I'm trying to tell, if Glue had participated in the which she like is not in a position to in this book, and it
Mhm.
wouldn't really make sense. But I really like how certain literatures put the feelings of being in a political situation and make it like um like a feeling that's consistent through the whole book. I'm thinking about like Wong Kar-wai's Happy Together, is that's set in 97, about a couple, two men who
Mhm.
instead of like being in Hong Kong, they go to Argentina,
Mhm.
the like polar opposite of Hong
Mhm.
Kong.
Mhm.
And this like intense relationship that's like always kind of ending, but always kind of trying to resetting.
Mhm.
And the sense of like longing for like a place and feeling like guilty for not being there. It's
Mhm.
like so prominent throughout the film. And
Mhm.
they're feeling all of these like feelings of the city, but in a very detached way. And I
Mhm.
think that's like a feeling that a lot of people have if you're not in Hong Kong, or if you're quarantined, or if you're like unable to be there at that time.
Mhm.
And because I when I finally came back, I was also in quarantine, and I was in Canada, and during COVID, when all of that has started, I personally don't feel like I'm in a position to be writing about that. But but at the same time, um, that positionality is also criticized through characters like Poing, where
Mhm.
he knows what's going on, and
Mhm.
he calls Glue out for um creating his own bubble to detach himself from the politics of what's happening, while knowing that Glue back when he was in Canada was very politically kind of
Mhm.
active as well.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I wanted to create this on the same vein of like um having been a local and now being almost returning as an expat. I want that feeling to be articulated, but also very criticized, and being
Mhm.
yeah, and being clear that that's not that's then that kind of conflict is very inevitable and uncomfortable, but also very
Mhm.
necessary.
Mhm. Mhm. What I understand you to be saying is that it's almost like the political situation, both in Happy Together and Batshit Seven, and I love that as like a sort of a what is it, like a twinned work with Batshit Seven. That's really interesting. But the idea that the political situation is kind of like the weather, it's something that suffuses everything, that controls everything, but in other ways is never looked at directly. That's really fascinating. Um, and I had a question sort of about your own politics, which I feel like you do touch on a little bit what you just said about your positionality, and maybe almost thinking about what are the ethics of representing certain things and not other things. And in that sense, your politics appear to be quite different from Glue's. And I'm going to ask a question about the differences between you and Glue next. Um, but I would say like there are parts of your work that are quite explicitly political. Parts of You Are Eating an Orange are sort of more critical of the white gaze. And as an author yourself, in the past few months, you've openly used your platform to advocate for Palestinians. So I'm wondering what you think about sort of how you as an artist might feel a duty to articulate explicit political opinions and to let those political opinions to some degree shape your art versus what the role you think of is such explicitness in art itself. Because I would say that this is the book that is not explicit sort of about its political opinions at all, and
Mhm.
in some ways it's disorienting, haha, for the reader.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah, I think for me, both of these books are the writing of these books are very political for myself.
Mhm.
Um, because writing these books also helped me better understand where I mean I'm politically I'm not really like Glue. Um I but at the same time I think I can, if given a different situation, I might. And I think I'm kind of afraid of that.
Mhm.
And by articulating it through a character who takes that kind of possible future to an extreme, allows for me to express a certain kind of vulnerability, but also criticality,
Mhm.
through writing that
Mhm.
I otherwise could not. And I think the political can come through in those ways. I think the
Mhm.
book is also very much like Orange, a book that's also about writing and articulating your feelings via
Mhm.
writing
Mhm.
a story. And and because it does refer to the two pieces that Glue will never write. Um,
Mhm.
but then I think you also kind of mentioned the pieces that Glue never wrote are the ones that I actually wrote myself
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
published. So the blurring of kind of those lines is me trying to use the writing as a form to um explore the different kind of outcomes of like how being situated in a political situation can lead to.
Mhm. Hmm. It's funny because I think of there are all sorts of tricks throughout the book that confused the reader to some degree, and ways that you sort of blur the difference between Sheung-King, which itself is a pseudonym, and Glue himself. And it seems like sometimes well, the way I thought of it when I was preparing for this interview was that you wanted your reader to think Glue was just a pseudonym for you, especially in that section where Glue discusses an essay that he published called Deeping Yellows. But in the real world, that is an essay that you published. So I was like, what's happening here? Like, he wants us to think that he and Glue are the same person, but then there's other ways where Glue is obviously not you, right? Like his birthplace. And what also kind of made me giggle, the fact that during the timeline of the book, when he's like really this like disgusting mess alone in his apartment, you yourself were actually, a published and beloved author, and he's like this steaming mess. So when I was reading that, I thought of you as like doing some sort of tricky business to confuse the writer, and like you were trying to confuse the reader. You were trying to make the reader unsure of the degree to which Glue was fiction or Glue is you. But having heard you just say what you said, it almost sounds like you didn't actually, your intention in doing that wasn't to confuse the reader. It was actually something you were doing for yourself. Is that right? Here, I thought it was about me, but it's about you.
It's about me, sorry. It's about me.
That's very interesting. And it makes me wonder, like I said, this book is like happily hopeless, in the sense that it almost suggests that there's no way for people who are inside outsiders, who have these competing sort of privileges and barriers. It seems like there's no way for them to have, I don't know, a reconciled self. But I wonder if maybe what you're saying is actually the answer is to write novels about your alternate self as a way to both uphold the existence of this particular frame of mind, but also critique it. Is that the answer? We should all write novels.
I think that's too heavy of a statement, but I think it works if you're down for it. Yes, it can work.
Yeah. Well,
you think so?
I do say that, like, sometimes people think that when authors write a book about a situation that they're trying to offer an answer, whereas I always say, like, but that's not it at all. What I'm doing is I'm just outsourcing my problems to other people. I write about things that I don't understand, and then I'm like, here you go, reader, that's for you now. So maybe there's, something really twisted that we're both doing. I have a few more questions, but I wanted to open it up and see if we have any audience questions yet, or to sort of cue our audience. If you do have questions, this would be a good time to ask them. Let's see. I think, we don't have questions in the question box yet, but okay. So I'm going to ask my next question. And while I'm doing that, please, if you've got your questions, you can start to get them ready. Start populating that box for us. Let's see. So you trade deeply in cultural references, and I think that's actually one of the real joys of reading your work. They're like these maps of so many other works, and you do it very deftly, and you do it in ways where it neither feels like you are, how do I say this? It neither feels like you're sort of like centering people who might not know those references, because sometimes that's what happens, right? Like, especially if you're working, like a lot of the references you make are to Eastern literature and stuff like that. And sometimes there's a way that authors might do that in a way that sort of centers people who don't know those references, and you don't do that. But you also don't make it impossible for somebody who doesn't have that background to sort of understand, which I think is a really fine line to walk. But it made me wonder, is there one book, I guess you already gave us one text, which is Happy Together, but are there any other texts that you think like a reader might enjoy reading alongside Batshit Seven? Maybe a book it's in conversation with, or if you were to make a master Batshit Seven reading list, something that would be at the top.
Oh yeah. I got a couple that I kind of pull from, and kind of helps me understand how to put Batshit Seven together. Yoko Tawada, she's a German Japanese writer who writes in both German and Japanese. Her book Where Europe Begins, I think it was published in 1994, where it's a collection of stories that are like quite surreal, very deconstructivist. She like does a lot of things with language and like trans-languaging as like a
Mm,
mode for articulation. And how like when you're a foreigner in a place, like language needs to catch up to you, and
mhm,
like language often loses meaning in her books. And I think that influenced how I use Cantonese a lot in my
mhm,
writing. Like the passage I read when the Cantonese a way to say constipation bean bay, it means like easy secret. Like that like and it makes glue feel like that's closer to how I feel than any English word I know. I know, and I think all of those ideas I have because when of reading Yoko Tawada's work. Um, this book is also like I think in conversation with a lot of the works by Kenzaburo Oe, who wrote A Personal Matter and especially 17 and Death by Water, where he's very critical of the Japanese Empire and he's almost like anarchist but also very humanist in his
mhm,
stance.
mhm,
And he's very honest in a personal matter about his love and also like dark thoughts towards his own children.
mhm,
Um and I think those two are very important to me. And also
mhm,
more contemporary ones would be like films by Lee Chang-dong, who also is a novelist, but
mhm,
his film Peppermint Candy and Burning, both of which have Burning has more to do with like capitalist affects and
mhm, mhm,
it's can be read as like a critique of like toxic masculinity.
mhm,
Um and Peppermint Candy has more to do with um um how statehood commodifies like the well-being of an entire person's life.
mhm,
About a person who was forced to be in the army and forced to be against the student-led movement, and then later on in his
mhm,
life, like because of that guilt and kind of trauma because of state, like led to him doing more kind of terrible things that he also goes batshit towards the end.
mhm,
So all of these are like all of these Eastern, like East Asian,
mhm,
like literatures,
mhm,
and as well as Wonkawa are like stories that I feel like I'm always needing to find myself having conversations with,
mhm.
to write about the critiques of empire and the post-colonial conditions.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I always think of Burning as like the most gripping slow movie you'll ever watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you can't look away, but it's like so slow. But yeah, it's really fascinating, incredibly disturbing, like kind of mind-blowing piece of art. And that's so interesting that all of these texts that you mentioned are not, originally created in English. And it's
Mhm.
always fascinating for me to think about, especially someone who's a diasporic person who only really has English. Uh, Fascinating for me to think about like what does it do to your work that it's written in English and it's published
Mhm.
in Canada, like
Mhm.
within those publishing conventions and in conversation with literature written in English. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I do, and I think I mentioned before, but Viet Thanh Nguyen was really he also writes in English,
Mm-hmm.
and but his writing also has influences from like other spaces, and what he's trying to articulate it's not really grounded in a Western centric lens. He's very
Mm-hmm.
critical of all sorts of power dynamics and empire, and
Mm-hmm.
he's very clear in how ideas of empire is embedded in diasporicness, and because his writing is in English but also like it's able to do that. I kind of draw a lot from that as well. um
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really always wonderful to hear. Yeah, about that kind of map that's in your mind of where your own work exists. Okay, I'm gonna open up some audience um, questions. Oh, the first one. Yeah. So, okay. So this one, I admit, was something that I didn't think of, and I'm so glad that an audience member asked this. And partly the reason why I didn't think of it is because a robot read most of the book to me, and so that I didn't really interact with the QR codes as much. But one of the attendees wants to know: can you talk about your decision to include QR codes in Batshit Seven? How many QR codes are there? Do you know off the top of your head? I think your editor is here. I wonder if she might know exactly how many QR codes there are.
Oh, hi, Deborah. I think 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Okay, tell us about the
Yeah.
QR codes.
Yeah, some of the QR codes are really boring. But some of them are also like quite fun. I think I wanted a sense of the QR codes do different things in different chapters. Some of them is like a YouTube video that's
Mhm.
um 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 like has a dialogue with the text and it's funny and it's kind of ridiculous, or like sometimes it clashes meaning with the text. So when Glue kind of becomes a ESL instructor, he watches like an old like Chomsky and Elegy basically like trolling
Yeah,
Chomsky,
yeah,
going
yeah,
like
yeah.
they're like, why do we invent a new language? And then like you
So
can
I think
it
he
was
says, "How many words do you know?" Like helicopter is one. Yeah, I
yes.
remember that. Classic, a classic. Yeah, yeah,
Classic. Is
yeah.
helicopter one of the words? And then like that juxtaposed with like how Glue kind of like teaches like very corporate English to
Mhm,
his students who are learning
mhm,
English. It's
mhm,
like it's like ridiculous, but also
mhm,
like you can see Glue like taking like using this to articulate his like how absurd the situation he finds himself in.
Like he's like,
Yeah.
I'm still myself because even while I'm doing this, I'm still watching Chomsky videos or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
do the QR codes then add like another layer of interiority?
Hmm. I think so. I also like the fact that as you scan the QR codes, your algorithm is like catching up to the same one as Glue's. So you'll be
Hmm.
like be like consuming more than Glue kind of is there.
Wow,
So
that's wild. You're trying to destroy all our algorithms. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. You add that to your CV. Okay. Let's see. These are great questions. Thank you, everyone. I also want to
Thank you.
know, someone says, what is the meaning of the number 7 in the title? And that's a question that I had too. We know what the batshit refers to. What does the 7 mean?
Yeah. Well, the 7 has many. In Cantonese, 7 also is also slang for like failure, you
Mhm,
fail.
mhm,
It can also be slang for like when you say like it also slang for penis. So in Cantonese, so if you say that a failure of Glue can be like he's so like B7 can be translated to Bunsa, like he's a dumb failure,
mhm,
um dumb failure of a male being.
mhm.
Uh, yeah, and there's also two chapters that are number 7, one of
Mhm,
which is in traditional Cantonese that's not really 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 written out usually, but people use it in speech. Um and that 7 is the chapter where like Blue loses his shit and goes
mhm,
batshit.
mhm,
Um
mhm.
yeah.
I feel like now that
Yeah.
you've
Also
explained,
turning 27.
yeah, yeah, right.
Oh yeah, and also sorry, there's also one more thing that's probably the most important is like the 7th month of the year, July, is
Mhm,
Hong Kong's return to
mhm,
Hanover.
mhm,
So
mhm.
7 is
97. Yeah,
97.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that you've explained all this, I'm like, you had no choice but to call it Batshit Seven,
Yeah.
especially with the failure penis. I mean, I was just asking
Yeah.
to be
Yes.
ashamed. Okay. Okay. So here we have a question. What is self-orientalizing? Can you define it?
Hmm.
Um, and also just iconic, there's a comment about this, an iconic Sheung-King move to historicize your own suffering in order to overcome it. So that's going to, you know, when they start Sheung-King studies, that's going to be the thesis. Yeah, but can you define self-orientalizing for us? I think I know a little bit, but I also appreciated the way the term is just sort of thrown into the novel, and you kind of just have to sort of sort it out. But yeah.
Yeah, I think in the novel, I think a good example is actually one that I used in Orange, where it's also from a Yoko Tawada short story, where this character, she feels like she should speak a certain way, she should act a certain way because she looks like stereotypically Japanese, and she finds herself behaving certain ways around people, and her being is hollowed out. And I think she even describes it as like a blank canvas where people are projecting ideas upon her, and so she kind of in towards the end, in order to overcome that, she like straight up puts on a no mask, and then she just starts like walking really slowly down the street, and then people are like scared of her and they don't even want to look at her, and then she self-orientalizes to a point where like people are aware of their self or their orientalist gaze, and then that had made them uncomfortable with their gaze in the first place. So it kind of transgressed the orientalization, and self-orientalizing can be that, but oftentimes is what like glue does. Like I think this is a very not really a typical example of self-orientalizing, by the way. It'll be to like appeal to the West in order to gain power, gain proximity, gain privilege, gain money. Yeah, but what glue does and what Tawada's characters do are taking it to extreme that it even transgresses that.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you describe it in the Tawada example, it sounds like reappropriation. It sounds like a move towards liberation, but that's not the way it turns out for glue. Yeah. So it's like the reappropriation has been appropriated.
Yes, reappropriation being reappropriated to an extreme.
Okay. Okay, so here's a question. I love these questions that try to draw a line between Batshit Seven and Orange, because I find myself thinking about that so much too. So this said, glue is almost like the I in Orange. So the main character in Orange is called I. If he existed in another universe, and I read him in a similar way, is the you in Orange somewhere in Batshit Seven? So if you haven't read You Were Eating an Orange, You Were Naked, the you is the protagonist's girlfriend, who he sort of pursues throughout the whole book. So is the protagonist, if the two protagonists exist on some kind of continuum and they're sort of similar in some way, is the girlfriend somewhere there? Because it doesn't quite seem like it, but the answer
yeah, that's a good question.
She's escaped from this universe.
Yes, she escaped. I think by the end of Orange, like this is a great question. Thank you so much. Towards the end of Orange, like the you becomes in reference to the narrator himself rather than the lover. So
he's in a relationship with himself.
Yeah, he's in a relationship with himself, and he kind of realizes that he needs to do something about himself. He can't just like pursue this person and find meaning in that. And then so I guess Batshit is the continuation of that, in that he moved on, and now he needs to deal with like personal and political things that he himself needs to confront. He can't just like find meaning through this affection towards this other person anymore.
So is it the same person? Do you think of them that way, that this is the same person later on?
I think it can be, but I think there's like it totally can be. Like L can be the person that is no longer in Glue's life. And like slowly like he's moving on to like doing something about himself, but is struggling and so.
I don't like that interpretation on a completely subjective level. because I want a happier future for the guy in orange, but I'll accept it. And add on to that question what do you think of what is the role of the love interests in Batshit Seven? And I don't know if you already answered that or if you have more to say there.
What, L or May?
Both, I think. Both, yeah. It's what is the role of the love interests in Batshit Seven?
Yeah, I think I was, again, to refer to like Happy Together again, I want to have feelings of like the living on borrowed time to be portrayed through the relationships, the romantic relationships that Glue has. So May is somebody where they have a lot of rules in their relationship. They're not able to be completely transparent. They're not open. They try not to talk about certain things. And it also like it's quite clear to Glue that May will one day leave Hong Kong. Like this is just temporary for him. So she's trying to protect, both of them are kind of trying to protect themselves when they're in this relationship. And I think that's a feeling that might be very true to being in a place or calling a place home, while knowing that that situation status is going to change. And then I think the two of them being Hong Kongers are trying to articulate that together. And then that made leaving a lot easier for both of them, and it made it feel like it's in all the time they were preparing for that.
It's like another plane on which for this kind of crisis, which is like this cultural political crisis to occur. Yeah, that's really interesting to occur in a different way. Okay, so one more question. How is the narrative in a book affected by another culture than the one where the narrator is situated in the story? Oh, so I guess this is sort of saying, yeah, because this is it's an interesting book because it's a book that's written in English, but about people in Hong Kong. And I guess we spent a little bit of time in Canada. Yeah. But what do you think?
Affected by another culture than the one where the narrative is situated in. Oh, I think this might be interesting to talk about the trans-Asian kind of discourse that Glue kind of reflects on after he moved back to Hong Kong. Like he remembers how uncomfortable he was in a business class that he was in. And he had and he kind of had like this like contentious relationship with Canadian-born Chinese people as an international student. So for those who will have yet to read the book, Glue is in design for business course, and they're talking about like subway designs and the prof is like, all right, so the subway chairs are not comfortable. People need to like sleep on the subway. That's why you need to design it in a certain way. And then Glue when like, no, I think the larger problem is like, why are people like so exhausted all the time? Like they should be sleeping at home. Why are they like sleeping on a subway? I think like this kind of designing for that is like a band-aid solution. And the professor went like, well, maybe you should like, to prove your hypothesis true, you should probably interview some people. And then Glue went like, you think these people so exhausted from work will like stop and like give me an honest answer for me to collect evidence for this? And then a CBC chimes in and basically starts another argument saying that like the fact that Asian people are like overworked and would never respond to surveys and not give feedback is a stereotype. And like you bring that to this is like very problematic. In a way, they're having very different conversations, the two of them, but both of them lead to a larger systemic problem that's not being addressed. And sometimes I think these discourses that happen in the West and like and Glue calls this like state-enforced multiculturalism doesn't really take into account the kind of nuances within these identities. And the person who's Canadian-born Chinese needs to protect himself because he does say that in that situation.
Mhm.
Also, Glue didn't respond because he knows that this person is saying this for this reason. So they have an impasse, and then it's like the conversation is unable to actually happen at that point. So I think that counts as another culture that's not his own, that's like contextualizing the situation that Glue came from.
Yeah, and I remember that scene so vividly. I found it so gripping because what really interested me is that it's like somebody's the Canadian born Chinese person who has sort of created a worldview for themselves that's based on them understanding something, being more enlightened than somebody else who is more privileged. And then Glue comes along and kind of busts that up and is like, but you're more privileged than me. So actually, like, you don't have an understanding of something. And then what I appreciate about the book is that every time you think you've reached the more righteous position, the book is like, no way. Right? Because Glue himself is not righteous in any kind of way. Because then we have Po Wing, who's like, what truly is the difference between you and this Canadian born Chinese person who you think is like making all these assumptions and generalizations to kind of shore up their own cultural position. There's no difference between you and them. And actually, this book in that way made me think a lot of the TV series I May Destroy You, which I don't know if you saw that, but that also was a text that, I mean, very different from Batshit Seven, but I felt like that also was a text that like anytime you thought you settled on like the righteous position, the most correct position, and it kind of like knocks you over. And I found that so fascinating.
Yeah.
So we have one last question for this evening, and it's a perfect question for us to end on. I also really like the way this person punctuated this question. They said, "What's next for Sheung-King?" Question mark, question mark. Because I think we all really want to know, what are you working on? What's next for you? What's coming up?
Yeah, I'm trying to work on this book that has to do with ChatGPT. So yeah, so I'm thinking about this like person who again maybe is a returnee. So I'm trying to like slowly interview more people who came back to like East Asia during the 2019, 2020, 2021, these years, and like how that kind of happened. And this character they they're having trouble remembering all of the things that led them to being here, and maybe part of it because of censorship, part of it is because like there's too much and they can't really write it anymore, so they rely on ChatGPT prompts. So they prompt ChatGPT to like make up a narrative for them, and then using that they're able to try to use that to articulate their own experience based on that. Then I want this narrator to become more and more reliant on this, and it'll become like a very codependent relationship with this AI that like shapes the narrative, and then to a certain point like it becomes really blurred. I'm also very interested in like prompt engineering and how you could feed in prompts to like push the limits of these like tools, these AI chat tools, and what it means to be writing off of that. I'm thinking about Su Guan, who's this like Canadian Chinese painter who like paints, and then a robotic arm like mimics her movements very imperfectly, and then she in turn needs to respond to the imperfect movement, and then they together create a painting. And I wonder how that could happen in words.
I think the really interesting thing about that too is the idea of teaching that's at the core of that, which is a big part of your own artistic practice. I think that you also work as a teacher. I think we all want you to finish the book quickly so that we can have another wonderful conversation. But remember, everyone, when that book comes out, don't scan any of the QR codes because he's trying to control your algorithm. So, thank you so much for this conversation, for this evening, morning to you. And thank you so much for another amazing entry into your oeuvre. Yeah, this is wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Thea. It's such an honor, pleasure to have conversations with you throughout the years, and finally having a long conversation with you online. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here so late in the East Coast as well. Yeah, it's an honor to have all of you here, and I'm so happy that all of you can make it, even though I'm far away right now.
Yes, thank you both so much, Sheung-King and Thea, for being here. This has been so amazing that we've been able to have this all over the world chat tonight on Zoom. This has been really special. And if any of you want to watch this event again or share it with your friends, it was recorded and we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel, so you can find it there. And America can drop the link in the chat for that. Also, on our screen here, you see some cool upcoming events that we've got coming up here. And Toronto author Anthony Oliveira is doing his new book Dayspring that just came out this week, and it's going to be moderated by Peter Knecht from CBC, and I think that one's going to be really cool. We've got another Uplift Asian event with Larissa Lai called The Lost Century next week. That'll be here in person at the Public Library. And then we've got a Queering Shakespeare event with Alan Bratton and James Frankie Thomas, also virtual in April on a Saturday morning. And I think that's going to be really cool as well. I have a favor too to ask everyone. We would love it if you gave us feedback about this event. As a public institution, our job is to do programs that work for you. So your feedback is very important, so we keep getting better at this. So we're going to share a link to the form on the chat, which should take you only about a minute to fill out. And if you want to find out more about events like this, follow us on social media or sign up for our email newsletter so you can stay in the loop. That's all for me today. Thank you all for coming. Huge thank you again to Sheung-King and Thea. We're going to keep the event open for another few minutes in case you want to click on some of these links we shared. But other than that, goodbye and have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, take care, everybody. Thank you.